On March 20, 2025, Indonesia saw a significant change in its legal landscape. The Indonesian House of Representatives, or DPR, passed the revised TNI law, Law Number 34 of 2004. This law governs the Indonesian National Armed Forces, or TNI. While laws are meant to evolve, this one sparked immediate debate. Concerns arose about the law's potential to erode civilian supremacy, a cornerstone of Indonesia's post-1998 reforms. The Indonesian Center for Law and Policy Studies, PSHK, was quick to point out flaws in the process. They argued that the law was rushed onto the 2025 priority legislation list, bypassing normal procedures. This lack of transparency continued with limited public discussion before the law's passage. This haste raised red flags for many who believe in open and participatory governance. The speed at which the law was passed stood in stark contrast to other important legislation. Bills focused on protecting domestic workers and recovering stolen assets remained stalled. This disparity in legislative urgency fueled public suspicion. Was the TNI law being prioritized at the expense of everyday citizens' needs? The TNI law's passage did not just raise procedural concerns. Constitutional law expert Benedictus Hestu Siptohandoyo labeled it a brutal democratic setback. His words, constitutional coup, sent shockwaves through Indonesia's political landscape. Handoyo argued that the law's expansion of TNI personnel into civilian roles directly contradicted Article 30 of the 1945 Constitution. This concern about civilian supremacy lies at the heart of the debate. Indonesia's hard-won transition from authoritarian rule to democracy hinges on a clear separation of military and civilian power. The new law, in the eyes of its critics, blurs this line. It raises fears of the military encroaching on civilian institutions, potentially undermining democratic checks and balances. The law's critics argue that its true intentions remain unclear. Is it a genuine attempt to modernize the TNI's role, or is it a veiled power grab? This lack of transparency and open dialogue has fueled public distrust and fueled calls for greater accountability from those in power. The TNI law's passage did not happen in a vacuum. Across Indonesia, citizens voiced their discontent. Student groups, academics, and activists organized protests, demanding greater transparency and accountability from their elected officials. One such protest at Gadjah Mada University, UGM, on March 18, 2025, was met with a heavy-handed police response. The use of water cannons, beatings, and arrests against peaceful protesters sparked further outrage. It raised questions about the state of freedom of expression and assembly in Indonesia. Were these rights being suppressed to silence dissent against the controversial law? The incident served as a stark reminder of the fragility of democratic space and the importance of protecting civil liberties. The government's response to the protests will be crucial in the coming days and weeks. Will they engage in dialogue with concerned citizens, or will they resort to further repression? The world is watching how Indonesia navigates this critical juncture in its democratic journey. The controversy surrounding the TNI law highlights a larger issue within Indonesia's legislative process: the inconsistent pace of reform. While the TNI law was fast-tracked, other crucial legislation languishes in legislative limbo. The Domestic Worker Protection Bill, for example, has been debated for years without resolution. This bill, if passed, would provide much-needed labor rights and protections for millions of Indonesian domestic workers, many of whom face exploitation and abuse. Similarly, the Asset Forfeiture Bill, a tool designed to recover stolen state assets and combat corruption, remains stalled. This bill is seen as vital for strengthening Indonesia's rule of law and deterring future corruption. The stark contrast between the urgency given to the TNI law and the neglect of these pro-people bills raises concerns about legislative priorities. The Indonesian people are left to wonder, why the rush on the TNI law? And why the delay on laws that directly impact the lives of millions of ordinary citizens? This inconsistency erodes public trust and fuels cynicism towards the political process.